Hey guys, I'm Greg with Desolate Motorsports, and today we're going to install our Saginaw power steering pump conversion that fits the 302 and 351 Ford trucks and Broncos from 1989 to 1996. One of the main benefits of this pump kit that we sell is to get rid of the notorious Ford whine. In the purchase kit, you're going to receive everything you need to install this onto your Bronco or F-Series truck, except for the fluid itself. You're going to receive the bracket, a belt, and all new lines and fittings to convert your Ford over to this GM style pump. We sell this pump kit by itself, and we also sell it as part of our complete steering package, which you can find on our website here. As you can see, the truck behind us is completely stock. This is a great fit for a stock vehicle or a truck with larger tires. It's going to last a lot longer than the Ford pump, and it's going to completely get rid of the whine. We're going to start the installation process by removing the Ford pump and installing the new pump upgrade along with some additional components.
We're going to start the installation process by first removing a few components that stand in the way of the power steering pump and bracket. Remove the factory lower intake tube by removing the two plastic panel clips holding it to the core support. Remove this tube completely. Next, using a socket driver or flathead, remove the two hose clamps to completely remove the upper intake tube. Using a pick, gently release the two electrical connectors on top of the AC compressor and move the harnesses out of the way. Using a 15mm socket and ratchet, rotate the tensioner bolt counterclockwise to relieve tension on the serpentine belt. While holding the ratchet down, carefully remove the belt from a few nearby pulleys. You can release the tensioner and remove the belt completely. Using a 10mm socket and ratchet, remove the 4 bolts holding the AC compressor to the bracket. Then carefully move the AC compressor out of the way. Now using a 14mm socket and ratchet, remove the 3 bolts holding the power steering pump and bracket to the engine block. Once the pump bracket is loose, you can lean the pump over to get better access to the power steering supply and return lines. This kit comes with new power steering fluid lines, so the easiest way to remove the bracket without a big spill is to first use a pair of vice grips to block off the return line and cut the rubber hose below the vice grips, ensuring the fluid inside the reservoir does not leak out. Then continue to cut the supply line. The stock pump and bracket assembly can now be removed from the engine bay. The factory power steering line loops around the crossmember and back to the power steering box. Using a 1/2-inch socket and ratchet, remove the 2 small bolts holding the stock power steering line to the crossmember. Since we'll be installing our upgraded steering box on this Bronco, we are not removing the lines from the box itself. If you'll be reusing your stock steering box, you'll need to first remove the old lines from the box and install the new supplied lines. Then, evacuate the old fluid from the steering box by walking the steering left to right with the engine off and the wheels off the ground. This must be done to ensure no contaminated fluid or old ATF makes its way into your new power steering pump. We highly recommend replacing your steering box at the same time as this pump and bracket upgrade. We offer an upgraded steering box as part of our steering upgrade kit, found in the link above. If you're installing a new steering box, now is the time to install the supplied fittings and hoses. The return line is a push-on style fitting that is located closest to the steering shaft. The pressure supply line uses a smaller AN style fitting and is towards the front of the truck. Be sure these fittings are installed correctly or you will damage your new pump. Use a small amount of grease on the fitting threads as needed and do not over-tighten them. Leaving them a bit loose will allow you to properly clock the fittings once the box is reinstalled. If you are not replacing your steering box, you will need to install these fittings while the box is still mounted in place, or you can remove the box entirely to install them easier. After installing the new lines, you can proceed to reinstall the steering box if necessary. Installing the Desolate Motorsports upgraded steering pump and bracket is as simple as reversing the removal process. Position the new bracket on the block, lining up the 3 mounting bolts that you previously removed. Begin threading these bolts in and tighten them down. Next, remove the plastic caps on the steering pump and begin installing the new lines. Thread the supply line with the 90-degree fitting onto the pump's output fitting. Slide the rubber return hose onto the nipple coming from the reservoir and install the supplied hose clamp. Now is the time to tighten the fittings on your steering box if you left them loose. Reinstall the AC compressor by positioning it in place, threading in all 4 10mm bolts and tightening them. Then be sure to reinstall both wiring connectors to the AC pump. The Desolate Motorsports steering pump upgrade kit comes with a new belt. This supplied belt is slightly longer than the factory belt, so be sure to keep the part number handy for when time comes to replace it. Reference the pulley diagram on your core support to properly route your new belt along the pulley system. When it's nearly in place, you'll need to rotate the tensioner pulley once again to reinstall the belt. Next, reinstall both intake tubes you previously removed. The upgraded Saginaw power steering pump requires power steering fluid only. Do not use ATF with this pump. It will damage the pump and ATF in the system will void your warranty. We recommend purchasing 2 quarts of AC Delco or Swepco power steering fluid for this installation and bleeding process. In order to properly bleed the power steering system, you'll need to turn the steering wheel from lock to lock. Use proper jacking techniques to lift the front of your truck onto jack stands. Do not start the engine or you will damage your pump. Once the vehicle is in the air, begin the bleeding process by first filling the power steering reservoir with fluid. With the help of a friend, turn the wheel back and forth from lock to lock slowly but steadily. Check for bubbles in the fluid reservoir. This is an indication that you are bleeding out the air from the system properly. If you don't see any bubbles or the fluid level doesn't go down after several attempts at turning the wheel, you can momentarily start the engine for no more than a few seconds to allow the fluid to pump into the steering box. Do not leave the engine running or damage can occur to the system. Once the fluid level begins to go down and air bubbles are visible, continue turning the wheel back and forth and refilling the reservoir until no more bubbles are present and the fluid level does not change. Don't forget to reinstall your reservoir cap. Your power steering system is now properly bled. Lastly, remove the jack stands and lower the vehicle back onto the ground. You may now start the engine and drive the car, but be sure to take a close look at your belt and pulleys to ensure everything is tracking correctly.
So now that the installation process is done on this Bronco, there's a few things I wanted to kind of go over with you guys about things you should watch out for and think about while doing the install. One of the big things is that you're working on a 30-year-old car. So keep in mind there could be other potential issues that could affect the installation process. While the pump is off and while the belt is off, we highly recommend checking all of your other pulleys. Check your tensioners. Check if they have thrust front to back. Check if the bearing is smooth. If they're rough, if they're grinding, replace them. Check buildup on your water pump, the smooth pulley of your water pump. We see a lot of rubber buildup on there, and that can cause a tracking issue with the belt. Smog pump, alternator, make sure those bearings are smooth and operating because you're gonna put this on and potentially flare up another problem. So that's a really important thing to think about while working on it and definitely check. Another thing is that on this particular install, we installed a new gearbox. Now, if you're not doing a new gearbox, you need to evacuate the fluid out of the old gearbox. And the reason for that is because it's one, old and potentially contaminated with a mixture of power steering fluid and ATF. When you're doing this install, you're gonna exclusively use power steering fluid, no more ATF. We wanna get all that old, burnt, nasty ATF out of there. So the way that we do that is while lines are connected but not hooked to the pump, you can have someone go in the car and cycle the steering wheel left and right. That's gonna pump that fluid out of the box. We would prefer to see you replace the gearbox, but it will help get some of that fluid out. And rather than potentially breaking the steering column, trying to turn it left and right, jack the wheels up off the ground and just cycle the steering left and right with ease, and that'll help pump that old fluid out. When you purchase our pump kit, you'll notice that the pulley is always set in the same location. This is what we consider our baseline. The baseline works 99% of the time, but we still want you to check it to ensure that the belt is in its perfect operating position. The way that you do that is after getting the pump installed in the vehicle, bled, and everything's running and operational, you will look down at the water pump pulley. The water pump pulley is a smooth pulley right in the middle that drives the water pump. There's been a belt running on that water pump pulley its whole life, and it has worn the paint off of that pulley. When the paint wears off, that's where that belt had tracked its whole life. And we want to make sure that we put the new belt in the same spot because it has created a small indentation in that smooth pulley, and that's where the rest of the pulleys are happy with operations. If you get this installed, everything's fine. Even if it's quiet, even if it's not making any noise, even if it seems perfectly happy, we still want you to look at this. If you see a shiny metal area on the front side of the belt at the water pump pulley, it's usually, if it's off, maybe 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch, if not less. That means the pulley on the pump needs to be brought off just slightly, about 30 thousandths of an inch off the front of this shaft. If you see a shiny spot on the back side of your water pump pulley, the opposite needs to happen. This pulley needs to be installed slightly deeper onto the shaft. That's going to ensure that the entire belt assembly is working perfectly linear and very comfortable. We're not rubbing on the edge of the belt. We want to keep everything tracking just perfectly square and in line. In the description below, we've put a link to a power steering pulley install tool that will help you make those adjustments if needed. Once you've made those adjustments, you want to check the water pump pulley one more time and make sure the belt is tracking in its natural groove. During the install process, I know we talked about bleeding the power steering pump system, but it is extremely important to follow our procedures and not run the pump dry. If you run the pump dry, you risk damaging the pump and starting this whole process over again. So please follow the original procedures that you saw in the video, the bump start, the filling of the fluid, and make sure it never runs completely dry. I want to reiterate one more time about how important it is to connect the pressure and the return line to the proper ports. If they're connected backwards, you will risk damage of the pump and potentially blowing out one of the lines. The crimped line is your pressure line. The soft line is your return line. This is low pressure, this is high pressure. We've shown you in the video which port is which on the box. Please don't get them mixed up because it will potentially damage the internals of the pump. With the power steering pump conversion kit, you will receive some fittings. These fittings do not need any type of thread sealant. The two fittings that go into the Ford gearbox are actually inverted flare and they're self-sealing. The conversion fittings that fit the new crimped line are AN, do not need any type of Teflon tape or thread sealant. And one more fitting that'll actually be installed already in the back of your pump when you receive it is this 16mm O-ring fitting that seals itself also. So there will be no need for Teflon tape or thread sealant on any of the fittings provided in the kit. When tightening up the fittings, don't forget, they do not need to be over tightened. Just give them a nice snug fit and they're gonna seal just fine. We recommend using AC Delco power steering fluid, but there's a few other brands that are fine. Swepco 715 is a great option. There's also some products from Lucas. The biggest thing is you don't want to use an ATF. You want to use a true power steering fluid. You're going to want to purchase 2 quarts and you'll end up using about 1.5 quarts to complete this install. Keep in mind, when you're doing this install, you do not want to overfill the reservoir with power steering fluid. The cap actually has an integrated dipstick on it and you will see a fill line, and that fill line is for when the system is cold. The reason that has a lower fill height when it's cold is because the fluid gets warm and expands. So we need to give the reservoir some room. If you fill it up to the top, as soon as it gets warm, it's gonna blow pressure past the seal cap and it's gonna look like you have a leak. If you do overfill it, you'll need to use a small pump of some type to evacuate the fluid down to the proper cold fill level. And this is an extremely important step in the process. A question that we sometimes get is, what is the difference between a kit for a 302 and a 351? This is all the same. The only difference is the belt length. So on the belt length for a 302, it's slightly smaller, and on a belt length for a 351, it's slightly larger due to the larger block. If the engine bay in the install today didn't look exactly like yours does, it's okay. There are differences between the years, speed density, mass airflow, and also the 89 to 91 is different from the 92 to 96. The bracket and pump kit still fits all models. Hardcore off-road guys can never have enough spare parts, and we totally get it. So if you're one of those guys that's gonna be out in the middle of nowhere and wants to have a spare of everything, we do offer the hose for the pressure line and also a hose kit that includes all hoses and fittings in the system that you can purchase separately from the kit to put in your spare box. The belts included in this kit are slightly different length from the factory style belt. The part number for the belt is listed on the sheath, and we recommend keeping the sheath in your glove box or in your toolbox so you can always go back and reference to it if you need to order a second belt. Because we can't accommodate every possible aftermarket circumstance, the belt we're going to give you is going to work with a factory pulley assembly. If you have aftermarket components or missing components like a removed smog pump, you're gonna be in a situation where you have to figure out your belt length on your own. Keep in mind, if you're installing other components at the same time as installing this power steering pump kit, like a gearbox or a Borgeson steering shaft, you will want to get the alignment done on the vehicle after the installation process. This is a 30-year-old truck and all the components are equally as old and worn, so we offer a solution to replace every wearable part of the steering. If you want to learn more about the full steering package, click the link right over here. This should be a pretty straightforward install, but if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out via email or give us a call here in the shop.